next. Joining us now to discuss the president's approach, Republican Congressman Sean Duffy of Wisconsin. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you, Wolf.
So Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, I should say, says he's spoken at length about North Korea with President Trump. He says the president is willing to abandon what's called strategic patience and actually launch a preemptive strike against North Korea if necessary. Is that something you think would be a good idea?
Well, listen, I think that comes with a lot of risk, as you've reported. What happens to Seoul, South Korea, if North Korea then responds? What I think is refreshing is we have some of the brightest military strategists in the world that work for the U.S. military and advise the U.S. president. So I think the president right now is going through every different situation to make sure we can stand down this North Korea threat. And one of them is a preemptive strike. So I think we have to look at the facts on the ground and also the advice of our military leaders.
Did President Trump draw a red line with North Korea when he stated earlier in the week that if North Korea made any more, quote, threats, they will be met with fire and fury, in his words, like the world has never seen? North Korea, as you know, responded last night with a threat of its own, saying they will launch 4 intermediate-range ballistic missiles over Japan aimed towards the U.S. territory of Guam by mid-August. That would be next week, unless they see some toning down of the U.S. threats.
It's interesting that North Korea wants us to tone down our rhetoric. I mean, who has for decades made threats to the United States and our territories around the world? I look at President Trump, and he's talking tough. And if you look at bullies on a playground, or you look at a bully in North Korea, they understand tough talk. They understand strength. And that's what Donald Trump is projecting right now. And I think it's important that not just North Korea, but the rest of the world understand that Donald Trump is being crystal clear, that he will protect Guam and American interests, and they will be met with fire and fury should they continue with their armaments, with their nuclear tests and their long-range missile tests, which can bring a payload to our shores. That clarity, I think, is refreshing. You know this. It's been 3 presidents who have tried the passive approach that hasn't done anything to step back the aggression of North Korea. It's failed in Cuba. It failed in Iran, this passivity. I mean, in Iran, we gave them, billions of dollars of unmarked cash and gold. That hasn't gotten that regime to come back into the global fold. They're emboldened by weakness. Strength is what gets them to stand back.
As you know, the president, by his advisors, have suggested he ad-libbed that threat of fire and fury the other day, not necessarily coordinated. That wasn't scripted. He just spoke out about it. Does that concern you at all, Congressman?
Well, I know the words weren't scripted, but the tone and the strength of the message, I know, had been discussed, or that's what the White House has put out.
So what if, let me interrupt for a second. So if the North Koreans go ahead and launch these 4 intermediate-range ballistic missiles toward Guam, and there's 160,000 plus U.S. citizens, people of Guam are U.S. citizens who live there, even if it lands in the waters 20 miles, let's say, from the coast, as they project they could do, what would you want the U.S. to do in response to that?
Listen, I don't want to put what my ideas are on your show. I think this is important for the president to continue to consult with his military advisors. But there might be swift and strong response and reaction from the United States government. They have to be aware of that. And I do think that the Kim regime has been used to playing American presidents and their passivity, and they could chart that out. They know how we're going to respond with Donald Trump. I think there's a bit of uncertainty with how he's going to act, which is confusing the North Koreans, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, the bottom line, Wolf, is how do you reduce this threat? Do we continue the failed policies of the past, or do we change our tone and our rhetoric? And even that change in tone, I think, sends a message to China and to Russia to say, listen, you guys better get involved. We can make a difference with sanctions, but we all have to be on the same page, putting pressure on North Korea. You can't say one thing to the international community, China, but then continue your trade with North Korea and support that rogue regime. If you don't want American boots on your soil, if you don't want to see a nuclear-armed conflict, get involved. This is escalating, and we have a nuclear hermit regime that's making nuclear threats to the rest of the world. This is unacceptable. It's untenable, and we need to have some pushback here.
What is impressive
But
is that
I wanna make the point.
under the leadership of Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, all 15 members of the UN Security Council unanimously approved a very tough sanctions resolution against North Korea. Very quickly, do you agree, I believe, as some of your Democratic and Republican colleagues in the House and Senate believe, that before the U.S. were to launch any preemptive strike against North Korea, Congress should approve a resolution authorizing the use of military force against North Korea?
I think that's pretty challenging. You lose your surprise component if you go to the Congress and say we're going to strike North Korea. I want to put this within our generals and with our president, who are duly elected by the American people, to take that action by surprise if they choose to do so. But I want to make it clear, Wolf, this can explode. This could be a powder keg and be very bad for the world. I think a preemptive strike is the last resort of all the tools that we have in our toolbox, because you don't know how this can play out, and it can be bad for everybody. So let's try to get other folks to the table and put pressure on North Korea and have a peaceful resolution. That's the best net outcome we can have.
Let's hope. Congressman Sean Duffy of Wisconsin, thanks for joining us.